Hey everyone, welcome back. So recently there's been a fair bit of doom and gloom in our discussion around MMOs. Well, more than usual anyway. Much of this was spurred on following the cancellation of multiple in-development projects throughout the course of 2025. MMOs that I'll say, at least personally, I was really looking forward to. Nevertheless though, there are titles still in the works set to release this year. So for today, I want us to focus on the things that we do have to still look forward to. What new MMOs can you expect to get to play in 2026? Let's take a look. Gonna start this off with the ones that have publicly announced a 2026 release in one way or another. Monsters and Memories. This is a game that I've heard a lot about over the past few years, but every time I went to check it out, I looked at screenshots and thought, nah, I don't know about this. I'll admit it, like I just straight up dismissed the game at first glance. That's what was happening. However, a couple weeks ago, I finally got around to actually watching an extended length of gameplay, and that alone changed my mind. I am now on board. This actually looks quite interesting if you can get by the intentionally old school looking visuals. There does seem to be a rather unique, deep MMO experience in here. So this is old school not only in how it looks, but also in its design. This is going to be one of those we will not hold your hand at all MMOs. Here's how the developer describes it. They say Monsters and Memories is a massive multiplayer online RPG inspired by the gameplay, social interaction, and sense of being in a virtual world that we saw back in the classic era early 2000s MMOs. The moment-to-moment gameplay emphasizes planning and tactics over high actions per minute or mastering a perfect rotation. The class design, combat, and other systems really emphasize player interdependencies, group play, and social interaction, although they have made it clear that you can do a lot of things solo, but to get the most out of the game, you're gonna want to work with other people. Character progress is deliberately slow and meaningful. They say that they are strong believers in the leveling being something to be enjoyed rather than something to speed through, which I wholeheartedly concur. This is a conclusion that I've come through to in recent years as well. Endgame is important, yes, but I don't want the bulk of the game to be blowing through all the content in the game. I like to kind of be immersed in my leveling nowadays. As for the world, it is set on a massive continent surrounded by black seas, littered with the broken remains of ancient lands and fallen gods. As for how this game came about, they say that it began as a discussion among MMO fans who wanted to create a niche, smaller budget indie game in the style of classic fantasy MMOs, utilizing modern day tools and development practices to make that dream come true. Since those early days, the game itself and the team have grown quite substantially. Honestly, I dig what they're going for here. I love the old school vibes. I'm sure the visuals will be a non-starter for some people. Again, it put me off at first, but as a fan of classic MMO design, even though I did initially sort of hand-wave this game away, I am now quite keen to give it a go. Beta testing has been taking place in recent months. The next test is scheduled to begin in March as well as April, and then they will be launching into early access on June the 1st. As you might recall, last year they held a playtest for Chrono Odyssey, an upcoming fantasy MMO, and it was pretty much universally panned. While not without some redeeming qualities, as a whole the game was a mess. I liked a few things. I liked the big seamless open world, the fact that you had players all over the place. There was a fair bit of content variety. You got points of interest full of enemies, mini bosses, side quests, secrets to discover, a mix of solo and group content, and world bosses all over the place. I also thought there was just some interesting looking environments and locations in the world, and the combat, while not the best, I would say overall it felt decent. However, that aside, again, largely speaking, the game wasn't in a great spot. First of all, it was a technical disaster, absolutely full of bugs, glitches, insane levels of pop-in, and probably some of the worst lighting I've ever seen in a game. I honestly can't believe they pushed it out to the public. It looked that bad. Normally, I wouldn't really complain about lighting, but it was pretty atrocious. Not to mention, the game itself looked absolutely nothing like the gameplay trailers. Not the first game to do it, but still worth pointing out. Everything felt really dated. It was a very static feeling world, not a lot of life in it. Besides liking parts of the combat, I do want to point out there was a fair bit of wonky hitboxes and some clunky movement. Yeah, overall, the game got a largely negative reception, and the developers took that seriously, to the point where shortly following the test, they released some 30-plus page documents detailing plans to totally revamp the game, like the entire thing. Some specifics on what is being included in their overhaul include the combat systems, the content and open world, progression and gameplay flexibility, technical stability, the game's art, its design and animations, the UI and UX, the game balance, social features, in-game guidance, the sound, the narrative, the animation and motion, performance and optimization, and yes, lighting and graphics enhancements. That is one of the biggest "we have heard your feedback, here is what we're changing" things that I've ever seen for a game. Now, mind you, this was initially planned to release last year. In the fourth quarter of 2025 is when it was supposed to come out, only to be delayed following that early preview test, the subsequent feedback, and then that list of changes that they've said they're going to be making. Now, it does look like they are going forward and actually making those improvements. In fact, in December, they posted a blog with some of their updates, and in one point, they showcased a few of these things with some actual videos, and this lighting showcase in particular, I gotta say it looks good, certainly significantly better than it was the last time I played it. As of now, Chrono Odyssey is planned to release in the fourth quarter of 2026. This information got revealed during a Kakao Games earnings call last year, although given the sheer quantity of things they're planning on changing, it may very well get pushed back. But as of now, yes, Chrono Odyssey is planned for this year. Cinder City, or as it was previously known, Project LLL, is a game that I've covered a few times in the past and am quite looking forward to, mainly because this is going to be an open world third-person looter shooter MMO. This is a genre mashup that I really dig, but there's just so few of them out there. There's like Firefall, Defiance, The Division, sort of, Warframe, not really to be honest. Anthem kind of tried it but failed, and Dune has some of these things, but it's certainly a much more survival game than it is MMO. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I just really dig this kind of mashup of genres, and we don't get many of them, so I will pretty much try any new game like this that comes out. As for Cinder City, again, they are officially referring to it as an open world MMO looter shooter. It'll have seamless exploration with no loading screens between zones. It's taking place primarily in this city, an alternate reality version of Seoul, South Korea. This is going to be roughly 8 kilometers squared, which is about half the size of Skyrim's map, and will include a mixture of city spaces, wilderness, with both of which having some outdoor and indoor environments. In this space, you've got the assortment of enemies to fight, a few different enemy factions, one of the primary ones being these cyborgs. There's also a few ethereal kind of zombie-looking creatures, along with all of your typical MMO open world activities, events, points of interest, and other players. The game will have PvE with public events, dungeons, and raids, as well as PvP, offering both competitive modes and open world fights. And beyond being a third-person shooter, where you're going to have your standard assortment of weapons to choose from, you're also going to be able to fill different roles depending on your gear and skill choices. Now, it will not have the holy trinity per se, but there are skill trees, and you're going to have different things to choose from, like invisibility cloaks, scouting drones, grav grenades, missile launchers, jetpacks, bullet deflecting bubbles, and the ability to heal you and your teammates. Vehicles are going to play a big role. There are both land and air options. We've seen a few traditional ones like trucks and helicopters, along with what appear to be these Titanfall-esque mechs that can be controlled by the players. And one thing I found interesting is they're talking about this game being at a scale which sounds kind of unreal. In an interview with IGN, they said that the map will support 300 to 500 players all playing in the same space simultaneously, with there being 5 to 10 times more enemies than players, which would be around 3,000 to 5,000 NPCs and 300 to 500 players. Now, we've had MMORPGs with many hundreds of players on screen at a time. That has been a thing, but I've never seen an MMO shooter that has 300 to 500 players in a space together simultaneously. That's a large number. Again, you've got big hundreds of players in games like, let's say, PlanetSide, but those are just PvP games. When you add in thousands of PvE enemies, you don't usually see more than 10s to 20s of players in shooting games. Again, you've got the shooting games, accounting for projectiles, calculating all the players interacting with each other, and then on top of that, counting the hundreds, and in this case, thousands of NPCs in that same play space, and relaying that information between your computer, the server, all of the other players' computers, then from those players' computers back to the servers, back to your computer. That's a lot. When it comes to open world shooters with players and PvE, again, I have not seen more than maybe 20 to 50 players in games like, I think Defiance was the biggest I saw, somewhere around there in Firefall. But hundreds, up to 500 players in a shooter in an open world with PvE enemies on top of that, I've not seen it. You guys have any examples? We'll see if they deliver it. Now, some of this stuff does look a bit stiff and generic, certainly looking at some of this gameplay. It's not ultra impressive, but there are certainly many elements of it that I do think look legitimately cool, and again, this is a genre mashup that I adore, so I am definitely interested in jumping in in and giving it a go either way. In a press release revealing the game's name change from Project LLL to Cinder City that came out last year, they did announce that it is planned for a PC and console release in 2026. Apogea is a top-down medieval fantasy MMO slated to release this year. Sort of like Monsters and Memories, I do think that this is going to be a game that for some people the visuals may be a hurdle. However, by all accounts, I have heard nothing but great things about this game. In fact, I've seen on a few occasions people say that it feels kind of like a top-down classic WoW in terms of the experience it's delivering when it comes to the features, mechanics, and gameplay. Evidently, it is all pretty solid across the board. You've got a seamless, intricate world full of secrets, quests, dangers, and most importantly, other players, while you'll explore forests, deserts, swamps, and underground caverns. They highlight there being no pay to win, all players having an equal opportunity to succeed based solely on their skill and dedication. The game is purposefully difficult with lots of challenging PvE content to take on. There is also PvP and a player trading economy. The game will feature 3 primary vocations, which include the Knight, Mage, and Rogue, which can then be enhanced further with a skill tree that lets you fill different niches and class fantasies. Again, I have seen a ton of positive buzz about the game. I've not yet tried it myself, but I am looking forward to jumping in. The next playtest will actually begin very soon on January 16th, and they are aiming for a 2026 release. ArcheAge Chronicles, I am praying that this delivers even a fraction of the good times that I had with the ArcheAge beta back in 2014. I'm not expecting it to, especially given some of the statements the devs have made about them changing core elements of the game, but maybe they surprise me. Hopefully that's the case. As for what we know, well, the game is going to feature an action combat system as opposed to the original's tab targeting. The gameplay trailers that they've released do show footage that looks kind of reminiscent of Black Desert Online, but with just fewer particle effects. You've got melee, ranged, and magic options, all of which will have access to dynamic contextual attacks when you're jumping, falling, rolling, dashing, blocking, and parrying. They're going to emphasize exploration of this large open world with a variety of PvE options, including dungeons and raids. There is going to be PvP, although unlike the big open world kind of all-out wars that you saw in the first ArcheAge, this time around they're focused on more small-scale team battles. Trade pack runs are still going to be a thing. There will be a variety of life skills, including farming, crafting, and trading. And they do say as well that housing will be a cornerstone feature, enabling players to build and customize their own homes. However, they are transitioning from the original's previous open world model, and then now instead will be featuring these dedicated housing zones that are instanced. Pros and cons to this. The pros are you don't have to deal with the land grab. The cons are instance housing just isn't nearly as interesting as far as I'm concerned. I really love the open world housing. Just being able to walk through portions of the game where you had these neighborhoods set up and you could see the houses that the players had and even walk in them in many cases and check out all of their stations and decorations and all that stuff. It was really cool and certainly added a lot. But again, there are cons, which include the land grab and people just hoarding up all the space before a lot of people can get the chance to get their own plots. That certainly is an issue that we had to deal with for sure. Again, I have got a soft spot for ArcheAge. I loved the original, at least until it got ruined with the cash shop and a few. I also didn't love the gear progression at the end game, to be honest. The upgrading your gear with a chance to fail, with a chance to break, not ideal, but the game content, the world, and so many of the features and systems, it was an amazing MMO. So I'm going to check this out just based on that love for the original, but it does seem like they may be straying in a few key areas from what made that game great. We'll see. In the end, I just hope that they've got enough of the original's positive DNA to still be a fun time. Last we heard from a Cacao Games investor call, ArcheAge Chronicles is tentatively scheduled to release in 2026. Also, I do want to mention Scars of Honor. This was not even remotely on my radar until I was putting this video together, looking around, trying to see what was scheduled to come out this year, and then this thing popped up, and I thought, okay, what the heck is this MMO that I've never heard of? So I went to the Steam page, I checked out their YouTube, watched a few different gameplay videos, and was actually pleasantly surprised. This looks like it could be decent at first glance. Some of the game's listed key features include skill-focused combat that rewards positioning, timing, and decision-making, deep build customization with over 240 talents per class, and permanent scars that fundamentally alter your abilities and playstyle. They've got ever-shifting dungeons with these dynamic layouts, shifting encounters, and changing modifiers to make sure no two runs are alike. Fair PvP in arenas and 5 vs 5 battlegrounds with equalized gear. There will be crafting and gear progression, and it is a free-to-play game that they say will have no pay to win, as monetization is focused on cosmetics and convenience only, and we'll see how far that convenience gets pushed. So yes, for a game that I never heard of, after looking at those gameplay videos, I thought, man, this actually looks like it could be decent, and I was was really interested in the game. That was at least until I learned that it's not just coming to PC, but also mobile on release. And while not an immediate indictment of the game's potential quality, history does tell me to keep my expectations low at this point. I have yet to play a single MMORPG that had a simultaneous PC and mobile release, where the PC version didn't just feel stripped down and having basically elements of the game designed for mobile, whether it's the combat systems, whether it's the interface, whether it's the mechanics or whatever. But maybe Scars of Honor is an outlier, and I will be surprised. That's the hope, as always. Last public statement that I found did say they intend to launch around the second quarter of 2026, although that was about a year ago, and I've not found any more recent updates, so we'll have to see. Oh, by the way, if you were curious about that Horizon MMO that we've talked about in past years, not so great news here. This was officially revealed not too long ago as Horizon Steel Frontiers, and it's a phone game, just straight up. It is such a phone game, in fact, that even though Sony is funding and publishing this thing, it's not even coming to their consoles. This Horizon MMO isn't going to be on the PlayStation 5. That's pretty bad. If you're looking for like a quality PC MMO, I'm expecting this isn't going to be it. And from all I saw from the gameplay footage, again, it's a mobile game. And so if you like mobile MMOs, I'm sure this will be great, honestly. But if you're looking for PC MMOs, I wouldn't no longer expect anything from this Horizon one. There is still the co-op Horizon game that's being developed by Guerrilla, and from what we can tell, that's going to be like a mix of survival and Monster Hunter elements. I don't know how big of an open world it is or whatever, but at least we may still have that to look forward to in the PC and console space. We also got a handful of MMOs I want to mention that are in early access or having some regular ongoing playtests that you could check out. Of course, Ashes of Creation, as you know, this has more or less released, despite the fact that it is in alpha. Technically, the game is available to everyone via Steam Early Access with a baseline price of $40. So I played about 25 hours when this first came out a few weeks ago, and I did have some fun, but kind of came away deciding I did not want to sink in any more time until the game was actually finished. And it does seem like it's quite a ways away from that. Not to say that there's no fun to be had, because I did have some fun in those 25 hours, and there are a lot of people playing. The game is averaging around 25,000 daily peak concurrents, which is no small number, even if you do account for whatever percentage of that happen to be bots, which it's probably some fair percentage. But regardless of that, I've already put out a few shorts talking about the game, and I pretty much, those few minutes of discussion have encompassed everything I really want to say as far as my first impressions, and I'm sure you guys have seen plenty of other YouTube videos out there. It's not bad, but it's far from finished. I do hope it gets there one day, as I would love to dive back in when and if they eventually hit 1.0. Stars Reach. This is a game that I've been keeping an eye on over the past year or two. It is a sandbox sci-fi MMO. As for its high-level pitch, they say it is a single starless galaxy with thousands of planets to explore, settle, and rule. Worlds in the game are dynamic and will change not only with seasons, but also due to a variety of other factors and conditions. In fact, you yourself can dig holes, creating entire cave systems, or set a forest ablaze with a little bit of fire. It's got third-person action arcade combat. They say that is very bullet hell inspired. There is a classless system with deep skill tree progression and dozens of professions to choose from, and the game will have a player-driven economy. It's one of those games where you can actually set up your own shop for other people to buy stuff from. Now, the game still has quite a ways to go, but I will continue to keep an eye on it. They are periodically running early playtest. In fact, just a few weeks ago in December, they had a stress test going on. Should be getting a few more chances to play the game in the coming months if you are interested. Also, I do want to say, in the past, I would have put Soulframe on a list like this, but now, after having played a ton of it on and off over the past year and a half or so, I'm taking it off the MMO list, because frankly, it's not an MMO. I really like this game quite a lot, in fact, but it's so far from an MMO at this point, it shouldn't be on the list. With the exception of seeing a handful of players in the game's various social hubs, 99.9% of your playtime is going to be solo or in groups of up to 3 if you manually form a group. You are never randomly bumping into people in the open world. That's the point. Maybe this changes in the future as they expand the game and add more zones. Maybe the subsequent zones to this beginner one are in fact open Albion, and then maybe it'll go back on the MMO list. But wherever you want to put it, I think Soulframe is a really great game. It's shaping up nicely. I really like the foundation that they've built. It's not really an MMO, at least as of yet, so it's off the list. And then, of course, we're going to have some major updates and patches and content improvements to all of the existing big MMOs. Let's talk about a few of those. Of course, as you would likely expect, World of Warcraft is continuing to truck along. On the retail side of things, we're going to be getting the Midnight expansion this year. Beyond adding all of the typical things, new zones, new level cap, the assortment of new content, gear to go after, and all that stuff. Another big feature this time around is player housing. After 20 years, finally makes it to WoW. Now, from what I've tried so far, this is actually a fairly in-depth system with loads of customization. It's pretty impressive on that front. I will be planning to check out the expansion, probably play for a few weeks, level up to max, gear up in dungeons, and clear the first raid, and then call it a day. However, much more up my alley is everything going on with Classic WoW. So you got the anniversary servers right now moving into Burning Crusade. I am super pumped to head back into the Outlands for the first time in 20 years. I didn't jump in when the original Classic transitioned to TBC a few years ago. But yeah, I was in Burning Crusade back in 2006, 2007. This will be my first time revisiting since then. Looking forward to it. The anniversary servers have had a handful of quality of life improvements. Probably what I'm happiest about is the inclusion of dual specking. So now my Paladin, for example, can both tank dungeons and then with a click of a button switch to a retribution spec for soloing and PvP. And then there's the hardcore side of thing. Over the past year, this has been my guilty pleasure. I don't make many videos about it, but I play it a lot. I adore this mode, super immersive, and the additional level of risk really adds to the experience. Now, while we are not getting dedicated hardcore Burning Crusade servers, they have recently added the Heart of Iron buff for anyone who wants to run the challenge themselves. And I'm thinking there's a fair chance that after people clear the TBC anniversary stuff, they finish the raid and they start to stop playing, then Blizzard officially announces hardcore TBC servers to get everyone to resub. That would make sense. That's kind of what I'm thinking might happen. And then finally, we got BlizzCon coming this upcoming November, and some recent hints that Blizzard are in fact working on the next big Classic project. Everyone's current expectation is that Classic Plus will actually finally be revealed this year. The potential here is huge and could easily mean that I'm playing World of Warcraft for another 20 years if they do this right, but I won't go into all that detail here. That's enough WoW for this video. Yeah, but spoiler alert, yes, I will be playing World of Warcraft in 2026, just like I have every single year since 2004. All right, I'm also planning to play a bit of ESO this year. We got some big changes in the works. So for starters, they're moving away from the yearly chapter updates that have been the norm for the past several years. You know what I'm talking about. They've got some big splashy name, an overarching theme, a few new playable zones, all of which include the typical assortment of points of interest, dungeons, quests, and new gear sets for you to go after. And then alongside that, the separate selling of dungeon DLCs that you can purchase. Well, just the other week, they revealed their new shift into a seasonal structure with the specific stated goal of addressing long-standing community issues while also adding new content in the process. So while this does mean that they're not going to be getting one big yearly easy to market splashy announcement where they're like, we're going to go back to Skyrim, we're going to go back to Morrowind this year. They don't have that, but instead they're going to be addressing ideally community issues that people have wanted for a long time, breaking away from that yearly content release, freeing up the development time and space to do it. So for example, throughout the course of this first year of seasons, they are intending to make some significant changes and improvements to the game's combat as well as the game's overworld difficulty. These are two massive pain points that constantly surface whenever I see this game brought up or whenever I talk about it myself. People are complaining about these two things. This year, they look to be addressing them. On top of that, with this shift, they are also making it so that all new content that comes out throughout the course of the seasons, when it comes to gameplay related stuff, new zones, new dungeons, new playable mechanics and stuff that are added, all of that will now be free, no longer tied behind paid DLC, as was the case in the prior year's chapter models. In exchange for this, and the downside is that with this, they are also adding a seasonal battle pass. So every season is going to come with its own battle pass. There will be a free tier, but also paid tiers at multiple levels, which have additional unlocks, which as far as I know are going to be primarily cosmetic. Them adding more monetization to a game that people already critique for being heavily monetized, probably not the best thing that people want to hear. If the exchange, for as far as I'm concerned, if the exchanges, they are no longer pay gating content stuff and it's just going to be cosmetics and things, I don't love the addition of a season pass. I don't need more season passes. I'm not excited about more season passes in the games that I play. But if all the content is now free and that stuff is no longer pay gated, I guess that's a kind of a devil's bargain I'm willing to make, right? That aside, ultimately, I think this move into seasons away from the kind of very samey feeling chapters year after year, I think this ultimately could be a good move and better for the long-term health of the game, especially if they are directly addressing making improvements to combat with updated animations, sound effects, and better responsiveness, lower latency feel. A lot of people have been asking that for a very long time, and they're going to be bumping up and allowing higher difficulty options in the overworld so that even with one spell, you're not one or two shotting every single mob up until you get into veteran dungeons. These are two really big, much requested improvements, and them focusing on that kind of stuff now, that has me excited. All right, Guild Wars 2. Recently, I did a revisit to the game, played for about 2 weeks straight, and I had an absolute blast. I think this game honestly doesn't get nearly enough credit, as much as it deserves anyways, for how good of an MMO experience it delivers. I played for like 2 weeks straight, and I had fun every single second of it. Also, I finally got around to trying out Action Cam, and my god, was this a game changer. I've kind of always thought the combat in Guild Wars 2 felt okay. It was like decent, but on the tab target front, it sort of felt a little floaty in comparison to something like World of Warcraft. However, swapping to Action Cam, I like it like 10 times better. I even prefer this mode now and expect it's going to be how I play Guild Wars 2 going forward. Give it a shot if you never have. Recently, they released Visions of Eternity update. Some of this is already out and playable, with more of it coming later in the year. As a whole, I think this game is great. I'd like to probably put together a video some point in the next month going over my recent revisit, but really liked it and probably will be revisiting it more later in the year. From what I've heard, old school RuneScape is doing better than ever, which is good news. Now, I've still not gotten around to playing this myself, but I definitely want to, absolutely. Even if it's just to have a point of reference and comparison for what they have done to keep this old school MMO alive and growing, and how Blizzard could do similar things for classic WoW. That's what I'm hoping. So I want to jump into OSRS at some point. I really couldn't find any info on whether or not Final Fantasy XIV is expecting a major expansion this year. At least nothing's been announced that I saw. I'd imagine it is still in the cards, but waiting on more details. Similarly, I will expect new content updates for the likes of Albion Online and Black Desert Online, as both of these games have been updated fairly regularly every single year in recent years as well. And if I find the time, I'd like to jump into those too. Now, there's a fair few other MMO projects that really little is known about so far that are in development. A lot of Eastern MMOs, including games like Perfect New World, Bellatores, ODIN, Project Q, and a handful of others. For me, these are all still kind of giant question marks. I really have no idea about the games, what to expect from them, or when they're coming out. However, maybe a couple of them do launch this year and pleasantly surprise us. Who knows? We will see. And then, in 2025, as you may have heard, we had a lot of bad news for in-development MMOs with the cancellation of 4 of my most anticipated titles in the genre. That included Project Blackbird from ZeniMax Online Studios, Project Ghost from Fantastic Pixel Castle. There was a Warhammer 40k MMO that got canceled from Jackalyptic, and then Amazon canceled their Lord of the Rings MMO, as well as announcing the decontinued support for New World. Not great. Now, when it comes to other big MMOs that are some 5-10 years away from now that we can look forward to, 5-10 years away from now, Riot is evidently still working on that League MMO, and then Guild Wars 3 is at least in pre-production at this point from what we've heard. So that will be coming out at some point. At least we think it will be. We'll see. We don't know. So yeah, while the past 6 months have been a little rough in the world of in-development MMOs, there's still a lot to look forward to. And honestly, right now, I am pretty pumped for 2026 when it comes to getting to play some MMOs. Beyond my recent revisit to Guild Wars 2 and my impending relapse to World of Warcraft with Burning Crusade, as well as my plans to jump back into ESO, I want to see when they bump up that overworld difficulty. I'm really keen to check that out. I'm also really interested to try Monsters and Memories, Cinder City, and Apogea. Those are probably my top 3. I'm hoping they make the necessary improvements to Chrono Odyssey. We'll see. And while I don't have super high expectations, I would love to be surprised by ArcheAge Chronicles and or Scars of Honor. Well, that concludes our look at the new MMOs and MMO updates scheduled for 2026. Hopefully you found or were reminded of something that you can now look forward to playing. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one, all right? Take it easy.